make America great again. How can you be against?
We are not going back.
Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm joined today by Rhonda Colvin and James Hohmann. We're recording just hours after Donald Trump was declared the winner of the 2024 presidential election, capping a remarkable political comeback that dramatically shakes up American politics. Now, we know you spent the last day listening to breakdowns of state-by-state results and who turned out to vote for which side. And the Washington Post will continue to update the election results. Do keep an eye on WashingtonPost.com and our podcasts and our YouTube channel. But on this episode of Sidebar, we're going to look forward to what Trump's victory means for Democrats, what it means for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and for America over the next 4 years and beyond. Rhonda and James, let's start with Democrats, who for the second time in 3 elections have lost to Donald Trump. How badly did Democrats lose to Trump, James?
Some stats to just illustrate how significant this was. This is the biggest shift rightward from one election to the next since Ronald Reagan's victory in 1980. Donald Trump's on track right now to get 312 electoral votes. That's the most of any Republican since 1988. Donald Trump is on track right now to win the popular vote, the first Republican to do so since George W. Bush
and something he's never done before,
which he did not do either time. And he's going to become the first ex-president since Grover Cleveland won in 1892 to take back the job. So Kamala Harris is going to end up getting more than 10 million fewer votes in 2024 than Joe Biden got in 2020. I mean, it is not, it's close, but not close. It really is an electoral landslide.
Rhonda.
You know, I think one of the stunning things, in the morning after is that if you think back to how much energy was in the Harris campaign, remember as soon as she became the top of the ticket, there was sort of a watershed of donor money coming in. There were more volunteers signing up. We all attended and reported from the DNC. You saw that energy in the room. I think that that is part of how Democrats are feeling right now and disappointed because they felt like there was so much enthusiasm that might take her to the finish line. But in the end, that's not true. And she actually underperformed in areas where you might have thought she would have done better.
Like where?
Well, one area that really stood out to me in our exit polling was with age. So Harris did well with the 18 to 29-year-olds, the first time, voters who are college age. That's not really a big surprise, right? She also did really well with those who were 65 and over, the senior vote. But it was the folks in the middle where she underperformed, people in their late 30s through 50s. I think that that's telling because if the economy was a big issue for voters, you would think that the middle part of the electorate, those are the people who are feeling it the most. Those are people who are, working, they are buying houses or selling houses. They're really thinking about the economy. And her messaging about working for the middle class, being the candidate for the middle class, it appears it didn't really work with that middle-aged group.
Yeah, I was really struck by how much movement there was in blue states. Like New York was way closer, Maryland was way closer. Trump still lost, but
New Hampshire was way closer. It was only,
Virginia, 4-point loss for Trump instead of a 10-point loss. In 92% of the counties in the United States, Trump got a higher percentage of the vote than he did 4 years ago. You talk about young people. I think that is really striking. I think we're living through this realignment that Trump has accelerated. In 2016, Trump won because of the white working class. In 2024, he won because of a multiracial working class coalition. According to the exit polls, 1 in 3 voters of color voted for Donald Trump. Trump increased his support among all Hispanic voters by 25 points compared to 2020 when he did notably well. And Trump carried Hispanic men outright by 10 points. That's a remarkable shift. You think back 2 decades ago, everyone talked about demographics being destiny and how Democrats were going to, have a permanent majority because Hispanic votes would give Democrats majorities in places like Texas once they became a large enough share of the population. And that's just not the way American politics works. It's tectonic plates that are shifting, and Trump has really sped up this long-term shift.
So is this a repudiation of the party, the Democratic Party? Is it a move away from Democrats, or is it a move to Donald Trump? Rhonda, we'll start.
I guess I'm happy to jump on it.
You know, I will say this. I feel like right now we're still in the fog of war. So I don't know if I could
Totally
say
fair. Yes, yes.
that it is a repudiation of Democratic policies, how people feel about Democrats. I don't know if we know all of that. What I will say is I think we can be more certain that this is a repudiation of the incumbent administration and how people felt about that. Now, we've talked a lot in our reporting the entire year that folks haven't really felt any of the policies that you would consider are positive policies for most Americans that came out of the Biden administration. So, you know, if they weren't able to square some of the positive things like, you know, better bridges, better roads, you know, cleaner airports.
Lower drug costs.
Right. If they're not able to associate that with the Biden administration right now, that affected the candidate on the Democratic ticket, which is, you know, the vice president.
Yeah.
2 points on that. Absolutely. I mean, you have to kind of, if you look globally, incumbent parties everywhere, from Europe to Asia, Japan, the UK, are losing because inflation was a global phenomenon. The dislocation of COVID, incumbents are unpopular. Those headwinds were incredibly strong. In the exits, only 32% of voters had a positive view of the economy, which is amazing considering that unemployment's like really low. The economy grew at 3% last quarter, but 67% of voters had a negative view of the economy.
When you go to the grocery store and things cost more,
right.
it's like...
It doesn't matter that the stock market's at a record high. If bacon costs as much, twice as much as it used to. 45%.
We were also wondering about who would get blamed for that.
Exactly.
Like Democrats were unable to say, here's what we're doing, here are our policies, here's how we're actually working on that.
Right.
And also, like, it's a global phenomenon.
Exactly.
Like, that wasn't breaking through.
45% of voters say they're worse off now than 4 years ago. Only 26% of voters said they were satisfied with the direction of the country. 3/4 of people who voted said they were unhappy with the way the country is going. It's just really hard if you're the sitting vice president to win. When you ask in the exit polls what's the most important issue to you, the economy was number one, 31%. And among voters who said the economy was their top issue, Trump carried them by 59 points. Not with 59 points, by 59 points. But I want to make a second point, which I think Joe Biden deserves some of the blame here. I think it was clearly a mistake for him to run again. And he put Democrats in this difficult position where they had to kind of push him aside over the summer after the disastrous debate performance. And I think during that period, before he dropped out, after the debate, there were a lot of voters who sort of came to terms with the idea of voting for Trump over Biden. And then once Harris became the nominee, there was a lot of joy, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement among Democrats, but it was sort of hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And I really think Harris struggled to distance herself from Biden and explain it should be different. She wanted to be loyal, but I really think like Joe Biden's legacy took a huge hit. He was one of the biggest losers of this election because his biggest, most consequential achievement was defeating Trump. And now his political career ends with basically like giving the White House keys back to Trump.
See, I would say that history may look at some of his legislative achievements as his biggest political achievements, but we may never know because they won't have time to grow and flourish, right? Some of these, the infrastructure bill, some of these health issues they're trying to like get lead away from children and things like that. We will see what Trump does to stop those initiatives. And so the seeds planted by the Biden administration, we may not be able to look back 40 years from now and say, oh, wow, look at what flourished from that. And a Harris win would have allowed that time to breathe. So we talked last week on Sidebar about like a path for Trump, a path for Harris, and we all said that the day after the election, things become very clear. You guys both talked about the fundamentals and how Americans are dissatisfied right now with the status quo. And there was a question about, could Kamala Harris seem like the change candidate? And the answer apparently is no. I mean, and what you're talking about, James, if Biden had said, I was going to be this transitional figure, this generational change, and there had been like this open process and really Democrats like fighting it out and debating it, that candidate, Kamala Harris or someone else, Rhonda, maybe could have been seen as like the change maker.
Could have been, and perhaps that will be a part of her campaign's autopsy report. I do think James hit on something that might really be important is she really struggled to distance herself from Biden. And I kept, while you were speaking, I was thinking about that clip that Republicans were, you knew exactly before I even described it. I think that one was one
Tell
that
the
showed.
rest of us.
Oh, yes. Okay, so she, the vice president was on the show The View, and one of the hosts asked her, is there anything that you would do differently in the Biden administration? And she said, no, I wouldn't do a thing differently. I think that
And she was almost sort of reaching and thinking, and like it was like
Right.
And then, like,
I mean,
7 minutes later, she was like, "Oh, I thought of something. I'll put a Republican in my cabinet." You know,
right. But it does show you that struggle between, sticking with the party, sticking with the person who was considered the standard bearer,
and who
Dance with the
continued
one
to
who
be,
brought you.
yes,
Right,
yes,
exactly.
absolutely.
That's a
There's
great phrase
loyalty.
to use
There's
there.
there's
And then also be a change maker or have a campaign that runs a little distant from him. That was always going to be a tall order for her. And, I wonder if that's going to be one of the critical and probably one of the areas of the autopsy report that has credence, because it is true. It was very hard for her to strike that balance.
Trump's campaign was sort of structured and organized initially, and then it got really erratic. I would say sloppy, but I'm sure Trump strategists would say masterful. He was, really just like rambling and saying offensive things, but he was like shaking it up, and Harris never shook it up. And then maybe that gets to this thing of like change and taking risks, but she didn't take risks. Is that fair to say? I mean, she worked super hard.
She ran a standard campaign.
She went everywhere. She talked to everybody except Joe Rogan. But
No, she prosecuted the Trump is bad, we need to turn the page argument as well as anyone could.
But she also tried to stand for joy and for the American middle class and all the things that we heard in the campaign ads. But she didn't kind of radically break away from Biden. She didn't do anything that was like show-stopping. And does America want show-stopping?
That's the other thing I've been thinking about in the last few hours is that
On no sleep.
Right, right. I remember talking to an Iowa voter when we were covering the caucuses there, and he said a lot of the people in his community, the reason why they like Trump is because he is that anti-Washington, I'm going to shake stuff up. And that is something he's been consistent with. He has never come back and sort of course corrected on some of these things that have blown people's minds, that he's said at rallies, that he's done. Instead, he leans into them. And apparently that works with some voters. So if you're going up against a candidate like that, who is never going to apologize for anything, that they're going to say, I'm not a part of Washington. We know how people feel about Washington, Congress, and the presidency, that type of message is still working and still compelling.
What does this loss by Kamala Harris mean for the Obama-Biden coalition?
It's a really good point. I mean, Donald Trump has remade American politics in ways that I don't think are fully formed or settled yet. Honestly, Barack Obama was sort of the end of like a previous coalition. Like a lot of these counties that Barack Obama won twice and Trump flipped, like some of them came back to Biden in 20, most of them didn't. And like very few flipped, back. And I think that like the Democrats have been trying to like just get as many votes as they can out of the suburbs, out of college towns, and Republicans have just figured out a way to like get unimaginable rural turnout and to win with such a huge margin, and then to sort of make inroads in urban areas. And so it does feel like the Obama coalition doesn't quite apply the same way. Obama had overwhelming support among Latinos and comfortably won Nevada, and that's sort of gone.
Rhonda?
It's really hard to say right now if these coalitions have broken apart or fractured. One thing from the exit polling that I also thought was interesting is that Black women and men came out in similar levels of support for Harris as they did Biden. 9 in 10 Black women, that's pretty much everyone. 8 in 10 Black men, and there was a lot of focus on the Black male vote. I think that does show you that there is still some of the core parts of the Biden coalition as well as the Obama coalition when it comes to the black vote. It's not a monolith, but it is steady enough. And we saw that it did hold in this election. But I think as the country gets more diverse, and it's not just racial diversity, it's socioeconomic, it's the education gap between women and men. I think candidates are going to be forced to do what Harris, I think people can say that she did well, is try to reach everyone. Mm-hmm. That coalitions, just relying on just certain parts of the base and trying to turn out vote there, yes, that matters, but a winning message will have to be one that incorporates everyone at the time you are running. That's also important too, because what worked in 2008 certainly doesn't always work, later on. It did not work for Harris. So, we'll see about how the dust settles around the Democratic Party, but the idea of coalitions, the Democrats may still have the base coalition, but they're going to have to start thinking bigger.
I mean, they've lost the Senate, they're in danger of losing the House, and Trump will hold the White House.
The MAGA movement is a real thing. You can't dismiss it as like a fluke anymore. We're a super divided country. We're close to 50-50, but like there is a movement, and Trump is the dominant figure of our politics. And it is a manifestation of our democracy. And in some ways, we're living through this age of Trump that started in 2015 and is now going to go until at least January 2029. We're not ever going to sort of like go back to the way things were before Trump.
So let's talk about what Trump's win means for Trumpism and the MAGA movement. Is America buying what he's selling, James?
I think a lot of people thought we're signing up for different things, right? I mean, he still has he has a big tent that has like differing, the people who are running his transition team are all sort of like the globalists and stuff that his other key advisors attack all the time. He has a lot of like corporate sort of people who don't think he's actually going to impose a 20% tariff, but then he has a lot of like union support, not like official union support, but sort of union member support who love the idea of like big tariffs. And so he's bound to disappoint people. He's also coming in on day one as a lame duck. He can't run again under the Constitution. And no other Republican has been able to like be MAGA the way Trump is. It's really Trump. And so even J.D. Vance has sort of struggled to like carry that torch and represents sort of like one side of it. And so it will be interesting to see like how the movement evolves. I kind of don't like that word movement, but the movement is going to evolve, but it's going to fragment. I mean, I predict in the next 6 to 9 months, there will be some like epic fallout between Trump and Elon Musk and some fallout between Trump and RFK Jr. Because like ultimately
people who may be in the cabinet.
Right. Well, but he may be, but you think about like what RFK wants to do. He goes around, and I went to 2 of his events for Trump at these Make America Healthy Again events, and he's like,
it's MAHA.
MAHA.
Yeah, I just want to say this. I'm going to like slow it down because you're like, Make America.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is the thing.
Yeah,
Make America Healthy Again.
And Trump has said, I'm going to put this guy in charge, and they're going to, because they're going to have enough Senate seats to confirm some of these guys. But like RFK Jr. goes around at these events and says, I have made a list of 4,000 food additives and chemicals that I want to ban, and like. You think like the corporate interests that support Trump are just going to be like, okay,
the
like
food lobbies
they're very powerful, and there's going to be a big fight, and like it's hard not to see sort of like Trump caving to the pressure, from one side of his coalition, and that's how politics works, and so like Trump actually has to govern now, and I will say like I think that Congress is going to be a lot more like a rubber stamp than the first time Trump became president. Not only does he have bigger majorities, but like they're loyalists. It's not, Bob Corker's not around anymore, or Mitt Romney, and like they're gonna rubber stamp what he wants. And so I think you're not going to see the kind of like internal GOP resistance that you did 8 years ago.
I was just going to say, tack onto that, you won't see that because look at some of the new senators that will be coming in. Someone like Bernie Moreno, who ran all on Trump's endorsement. He didn't do a lot of ads where he showed himself, talked about any policy he wants to put through. It was all Trump speaking to Ohioans to tell them to vote for Moreno. You think about Sheehy in Montana, another newcomer to politics. He has a majority in the Senate that will not likely push back. I'm really interested to see where your Senator Thunes go, if he is the leader of the majority in the Senate, because he of course has that institutional knowledge that predates some of these new guys, but they may be able to overtake in ways that they weren't able to in that first Trump administration. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that he will have a rubber stamp, almost a blank check in some ways, where he will be able to do a lot with the majority he has in the Senate.
I want to talk more in a moment about just what Trump has told us about how he will govern, because that is a hugely important piece of this. But let's just stay for one more moment on America's decision here in electing Trump and doing it with so much more volume than they did in 2016, and obviously with a bigger percentage of the popular vote, no matter where it goes from here, than of course happened in 2020. So 2 impeachments, Rhonda, January 6th, his civil cases. On January 7th of 2021, could we have ever pictured ourselves here as Republicans were sort of trying to wash their hands of him or figure out how to deal with this? He was being banned from social media platforms. Does America have a short memory, or are they at peace with this? Or are they drawn to it?
It may be a collection of all of those things in some ways. I mean, his base is probably drawn to it. But I would even say, January 7th, 2021, people would have not thought yesterday would have happened, another election of Trump. I would even say the afternoon of January 6th, when we saw Republicans, going on cable while they were barricaded in their offices, asking him to stop doing what he was doing.
Yeah.
Right. Remember, people died as a result of January 6th. So I think, yes, there is a part of the electorate and the system where people have short memories. I also think people can be pretty fickle, especially when it comes to a perception of economy and things that are going on in the pocketbook. A lot of times people just vote solely on that. So, it's so interesting. It really is mind-blowing. I mean, you just made that list. 2 impeachments. Even after the first impeachment, I would have said, it's tough to see Trump be elected again. But you've had all of these moments. You've had the trials, or the almost trials, that we were covering earlier this year, and that really didn't make a dent. So.
I mean, it made a dent in the other way. I mean,
right. It helped.
You quote that Ron DeSantis line, James. Remind us of what DeSantis said when Donald Trump was first indicted.
DeSantis said after he dropped out of the presidential race that the day Trump was indicted in Manhattan by Alvin Bragg was the day that Trump could no longer be defeated for the Republican nomination. That there was this rally around the flag effect, that people, Republicans, conservatives, really did feel like they were, going after Trump because he was fighting for them, and that his support just in fundraising plummeted after that.
And it also just showed perceived truth to this thing that Trump was saying of I'm being persecuted, right? They're lying about me winning the election, which is not true. They're after me, they're trying to get me, and it could kind of be brushed aside. But then when he's literally indicted in New York, which is seen as a liberal bastion, and then there are subsequent indictments, it gave credence to this idea of they're really going after that guy, and he's really standing up for himself and for me. He's tough. Tough, of course, led us into the machismo that Republicans were really trying to lean into with him and make him represent. Yeah. So there we go.
I mean, I was at a Trump rally in Pennsylvania on Sunday, and the most popular merch that was in the line was I'm voting for the felon. People did sort of embrace this bad boy image.
It also shows you, to James's point about a realignment happening, that is certainly true, and I think that's something that is underestimated with Trump, because if you think about it, things that work for Trump still don't work for other Republicans. I'm thinking about Mark Robinson, today, who's waking up thinking, the things that he said on the pornography website, and speaking of allegedly, and speaking about a black man going back to slavery. I mean, mind-blowing things. And his constituency there in North Carolina said, nope, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
However, they voted for Trump. So the things that he does also don't match up with other candidates. I think that shows that Trump is a unique change maker in the sense of he alone is able to do things others can't. And I think that shows it may not be a positive strength, but it is something that is probably hard to beat for other candidates.
America built him. Hollywood embraced him. We made him an icon of success in the 80s. And Trump also presented himself as the easy solution, right? He makes things seem simple. It's broke, I can fix it. I'm gonna slap those tariffs on. And then people are like, even in his own circle, are like, I don't know, that's such a good idea. But he simplifies the argument. He promises to fix things. That also kind of fits into this like paternal macho, like I am going to take care of the women. Women may not like that, but it is simple. And did it stick?
It must have with some voters. And in fact, if you saw the last few rallies right before Election Day, they were giving out the hard hats and the signs that said Trump will fix it. It could have been something that resonated with a lot of people. I don't think that was solely it. But when you're speaking again about the economy and how people feel about it, if someone's saying, look, I'm going to change everything, life's going to be great if you vote for me, some people just, check that box just based on what the person is saying. I think that goes to his strategy going after low propensity voters and low information voters, voters who don't read the news, who probably didn't know the ins and outs of all of the challenges Trump was facing this year, and said, hey, he says he can fix this economy. Let's go with that.
One thing I'm looking forward to learning more about is people's mood going into the ballot booth. Did they feel angry? Did they feel hopeful? Did they what emotions motivated them? Are they pissed? Are they fed up? Are they frustrated? And if so, that's like, you want change, right? You want change. Well, this gets us to our final segment today, which is what Donald Trump can actually do in office, and he's promised to fix it. How's he going to fix it? What is he going to do? We'll be right back with that in a moment. You're listening to Sidebar from the Washington Post. Joining us is senior video journalist J.M. Rieger. J.M. is at Howard University right now. J.M.'s been pretty much living there for the last 24 hours. He was there on Tuesday night where Kamala Harris's supporters were gathered to cheer on their candidate, to gather, to celebrate. And then, J.M., we just stayed with you all night as the mood depressed and as things really deflated. You're back there Wednesday because it's the site of Kamala Harris's concession speech. So if you hear some music behind JM, it has a very different tone than it did yesterday when the music was very upbeat and jubilant. Now JM, I think Rhonda said it sounds like...
Well, James said it was elevator music. I said it sounds like the music you wait for at the dentist's office. It's very subdued.
Cold music.
It's got that subdued, sort of peaceful vibe. JM, thanks for joining us. We wanted to have you on to talk about Donald Trump in his own words and what he has pledged to do in a second term. Tell us about what he's promised.
Yeah, I mean, the top line, Libby, is that he's talked over and over again about how in a second term he wants to really expand his powers and centralize powers in the executive branch. If you look at what he said about the Department of Justice and what he said about Schedule F, which is this idea of getting rid of some career federal employees and replacing them with loyalists from the White House, some of this is taken from Project 2025, but a lot of this, frankly, is his own words. He himself has talked about Schedule F. They put in an executive order to that effect at the end of his first term. They just weren't able to fully implement it. When they talk about eliminating the Department of Education, Donald Trump himself has said that he wants to do that. And when you talk about potentially prosecuting his political opponents, like Joe Biden, for example, which he has floated, these are all things that have come out of his own mouth over the last 2 years during the course of this campaign. And it paints a really striking portrait of what could be in a second Trump term.
We're also watching, of course, to see who Donald Trump surrounds himself with. James, what are you watching on that front?
We'll start to get nominations soon, and we're still figuring out how big the Republican majority is going to be. In the Senate, it'll take a couple weeks for the House, but they don't have to know who won the House, but they don't have a role in confirming folks. I think it will set a tone of does he put someone like Doug Burgum, who I think is like an acceptable establishment, Republican that people can sort of live with at a place, Secretary of State, Secretary of Interior, or is he putting like Kash Patel, who was the acting Secretary of Defense in 2020 and is sort of seen as a wild man? I think my hunch is he's going to bring on like vetted loyalists who were there for him through the whole campaign.
Okay, wait. What is a vetted loyalist?
Yes, I mean,
vetted says a very different thing to me than
vetted
loyalist.
for loyalty.
Okay,
not
that's
vetted
very
for
different
competence.
than or vetted for like criminal background
Right.
check or the normal
there's
things you
actually,
get
I mean,
vetted
one of the
for.
weird, one of the there's been some reporting that some of the people who are involved in like Trump's personnel operation want to waive the requirement that you have to get a traditional background check for your security clearance. And so normally the FBI does these expedited background checks. And there was a piece in the New York Times last week about how they're thinking about trying to circumvent that, which it would be wild because you'd be giving some people like access to the government's most closely guarded secrets without any background check. So if he starts doing stuff like that, I think that does set the tone for he's going to surround himself with a bunch of hardcore Trumpers, and some of it is it people set on revenge and retribution? Is it people who have a track record of just being really, really conservative? But does he put someone at the Department of Education who wants to dismantle the Department of Education? Right? Does he put someone, who at HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, who wants to like get rid of Section 8 housing? Like we'll get a sense pretty soon. I think. Trump might wait a couple days, but we'll know in the coming weeks sort of like what kinds of people he's going to stock his government with. And because he won the way he did, and because Republicans won in the Senate, I think there were a lot of people who thought, well, if Trump wins, he'll sort of be checked and he's not going to be able to get the really wild, extreme people through. But he's probably going to be able to get almost all of them through.
Yeah, the Senate majority is so important.
Right.
Sorry to cut you off, but this is like one of your areas of expertise. Like if it had just been 51, people like, or 50, like people like Lisa Murkowski might be the equivalent of like the Joe Manchins, right, on the Republican side of the aisle. But if you've got a wider majority, a bigger margin to work with, you don't have to worry about wooing every moderate Republican.
You don't. And I have been saying this for months and telling people that down ballot is incredibly important, and people don't realize how important until it's probably too late and everybody's in place. And what we're seeing now, I agree with James that those first few nominations for agency heads or cabinet members, that's going to be really important and telling, because with the Senate majority that we think he will have, he will not need to please anyone. There is not going to be any compromise that will need to be struck. I covered his first administration, or covered it from the lens of Congress, and covered some of these confirmation hearings where you could see some of the choices were ones that could get through a Senate vote on the floor. Of course, any confirmations go through Senate Judiciary. Most of them go through Senate Judiciary, go to the floor. So sometimes there's a sense of, okay, which ones will get a full vote? But if you have a majority like he might have setting up right now, he could get, as James said, all sorts of folks through.
Two quick thoughts on that. One is, with a majority like this, you could see someone like Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito retire because they are getting older, and Trump could fill their vacancy with someone who's really young and could be on the court for decades. The second thing is, I think one of the really early tests that I'm just thinking of as you're talking is next week, I think November 13th, Republicans are going to meet to elect their new majority leader, and it's in the Senate between John Thune from South Dakota, John Cornyn from Texas, and Rick Scott from Florida. And they've all been sort of working behind the scenes and trying to get the votes. Does Trump end up wading into that, right? Does Trump like put his weight behind someone, or some fourth candidate, who says this, and he says, this is my guy?
Which could very
like you could see Trump saying, it's a secret ballot. But then you'd be in this weird situation where if Trump like really tried to tip the scales, and then Republican senators still pick someone else to be their leader, that would say something about, wow, maybe Republican senators aren't just going to roll over and go along with what Trump wants.
And we saw he had a heavy hand even when he was not in the presidency. In this last term of Congress, he had a heavy hand in what legislation moved forward with the immigration bill.
And the speaker's race.
And the speaker's race. Yeah, that's another one people forget.
Yeah. JM, he's also talked about pardoning the January 6th people, some of whom have gotten everything from like fines to a lot of jail time. Tell us about that.
Three things to, I think, stick on the radar here as we're looking forward here is, he's talked about pardoning many of the January 6 rioters. We've talked at length on this show about his criminal cases against him at the federal level. Those are almost certainly gone, right? He said as much. And on top of that, there's a major one of the biggest accomplishments of his first term was the tax cuts, right? And those expire in early 2025. So there's going to be a big negotiation in Congress, not to mention that they haven't even passed a full spending bill. So there's a chance that they punt that and they do it all as one thing. But when Trump, this gets into him centralizing power, because one of the other things he has said he wants to do is deport everyone in the country who came in illegally. He wants to deport all of them. And it has been enthusiastically embraced by his really base core supporters. And we've talked to some of those on the campaign trail here. That is going to cost a lot of money. There are estimates out there putting that in the tens of billions of dollars potentially, if not more, in terms of if he were to really realize that. There is a chance that he folds that into those negotiations in the springtime here when those tax cuts expire and when there's that big negotiation. But to what James and Rhonda were just saying, this is a completely different Congress than what he had coming into office in 2017, and in many ways a much Trump-friendlier Congress.
Yeah, this is one of those questions like James was talking about, some of the health things that RFK has been floating. I hesitate to call them health things, health adjacent things, health direction things, right?
Ending fluorination.
Totally, but if if Donald Trump gets serious about this pledge to deport millions of people from this country, will big business speak up and say, "Oh my God, they are our workers who are actually doing the labor for America"? And so will we see, like, where does that reality hit? Just like with the question of, like,
and public opinion would turn so rapidly. I mean, think about family separation.
Well, James, we'll see, or would it?
I mean, you're right. You're right. No.
People have
you're
these
right.
options and they voted.
You're
so
very good point.
Would they see? Would it change? Would it not? I want to thank you so much, JM, and the rest of us. I want to leave with the thought that you shared with us, I think at 3 o'clock in the morning, James, about how we're really in this Trump era. I don't know if you remember what you said, but it really made me think about this moment that we're living in. Yeah,
I mean, it feels like he's going to, whether you like him or don't like him, be as consequential a president as FDR or Andrew Jackson. That we're in this age of Trump where he's fundamentally not just realigned the coalitions, as we were talking about, but changed our politics. Like, he's talking about tariffs and protectionism in a way like American politicians have not talked about since the 1890s. I mean, this isn't just like rejecting neoliberalism and winding back NAFTA. This is like a complete change of the way that we do trade and tax
and it has
policy
the world
in this
watching.
country. And the world is freaking out, and he really does want to abdicate sort of the post-World War II American leadership. We'll see what he does. With NATO, you don't have to formally withdraw from NATO to sort of undermine it. He has said that he won't commit to defend Taiwan. And so, does that embolden Xi Jinping to sort of be more aggressive? So there's going to be chaos. And it is it's what people voted for, and it is just like we're living in the Trump age, and it's not just the politics. You want to say like the Trump political era, but it's like he's the defining figure in American life, which is wild to think about. And this is the Trump era, and it's going to go on for at least 4 more years.
James, Rhonda, JM, thank you to all of you. Sidebar will be back next week. We will be on your podcast feed, or you can find us if you want to watch along on YouTube. Just look for the Washington Post on YouTube. I'm Libby Casey. We'll talk to you again soon.